Hi, everyone, and welcome back to part two of the DNA Mind report. As a quick reminder, I was going through, I'm Helen from DNALife. I was going through the DNA Mind test, looking at the biological areas, the genes, the genotypes that drive the major disorders from neurodegenerative disorders, mood dysregulation, and addictive behavior. We had already covered lipid metabolism through to cell signaling, ending with the ChRNA3 genes and the importance of them with regards to nicotine addiction. This person not having these high impact factors coming through here. So their genotypes not increasing risk for addiction or the number of cigarettes smoked per day. But if they were there, looking at just extra medical, pharmaceutical assistance, further support groups, and making sure that even if someone has quit for 10, 15, 20 years, not to even have one puff of a cigarette again, because the risk of that addiction coming back is very high. So those are just really insightful in terms of addictive risk. Number of cigarettes smoked per day, look at that vitamin C intake, and then extra support required to get off that nicotine. And then going into, I would say, like some of the genes of the time at the moment. So much research and just so many kind of podcasts and things coming through around your dopaminergic pathways. And we know when we're thinking about dopamine, think reward. It's your reward circuitry pathway. When you eat fatty, sugary, carbohydrate mixed foods, you get an immediate rush of dopamine. It actually helps to produce dopamine. When you're smoking nicotine, it actually activates your dopamine secretion, or smoking when you're using nicotine, excuse me. And when you their illicit drugs, it's around that dopaminergic activation. Other things that activate dopamine, and this is really, really important when it comes to managing risk, is looking at what else can activate dopamine. So task completion is a major ticking something off a list, making a list and ticking those things off in a day. Finishing something, accomplishing something is a major dopamine rush. You also get some of your extreme sports that helps with dopamine production. And so there are other ways to help with that dopamine production, healthy ways to elevate dopamine production instead of always looking at the illicit options or the unhealthy options around your addictive behaviors like gambling, or looking at binge eating disorders, or alcohol intake, nicotine use, and then other illicit drugs. So why this pathway is so important is that it's looking at, I'm going to start with these DRDs. So it's looking at your DRD1, DRD2, DRD3, and DRD4. These are dopamine receptors that you make dopamine, and it needs to attach to that receptor to recognize its effect. And when you have variations in these genes, you'll see a moderate or a high impact factor coming through. So that's when you know something wrong with the dopamine connection, not getting it or not experiencing it as well as I should. And I may be that person that, because of that kind of disconnect, I'm going to seek dopamine more. When I get a little bit of a taste of it, I'm going to want a lot more of it. So these individuals may almost tend, you might see these individuals coming through in it's not always a bad thing, it's just how you use it. So as high power executives or extreme sportsmen, because of that drive that you want to continue to go, is sometimes can be used. So it depends how you use it, and it depends obviously on your background as well. So if there was childhood trauma, an unstable environment, then almost leading to an individual wanting different coping mechanisms, and then on top of that, you have these risk variants, the chances of developing an unhealthy addictive behavior is much greater. Whereas if you've got the support, a healthy environment, and you know that you can achieve your dopamine on a much healthier level through task completion, through just being quite driven and getting things done, that's a much better way to do it. Other things that are really important to make these receptors much more sensitive is looking at your vitamin D. So it's a very important hormone vitamin that helps to activate thousands of genes downstream, one of them helping really in the dopamine receptor side. And then you also need your tyrosine and your B vitamins as the building blocks for dopamine. So if you don't have your tyrosine is an amino acid, so you need good quality protein to help with dopamine production, and then you need your B vitamins there as well for that dopamine production. And then on top of that, for the receptors to function nicely, you need the vitamin D. So those all playing a role together. Something else that's quite interesting to help with really the expression or the production of these receptors is looking at massage therapy has been shown to help with increasing dopamine production as well. So that's just an interesting one to add to the list. Keeping food diaries, getting positive affirmations. So food diaries for those who have addictive or binge eating disorders, to relate why were they eating a specific food with a specific emotion, and then with what happened around that. So I had a fight with someone. I was in a very stressful meeting. It was seeing a trigger individual, and that then made me go back into the stress. I needed kind of a dopamine rush. So all putting that together for that kind of person is really helpful. If you do have these variants and you know there is an inclination towards some kind of substance, be it pizza, donuts, alcohol, nicotine, whatever it might be, that has to be a complete cold turkey situation where you cut that out to help, and then look at healthy replacements like that task completion, positive affirmation, getting outdoors, getting your gut and your gut right, and then really going through therapy to help manage any of those kind of the wounds from the past. And so that will help in this area quite a lot. So those are all your dopaminergic receptors, that attachment that needs to be really kind of focused on if that becomes a big issue. From your receptors attaching, the dopamine attaching to that receptor, there's this other kind of part where if the dopamine sits around between the two synapses, so it's kind of floating there, if you will, not really, but it's sitting there. And what can happen is that dopamine, if it's not being attached to this receptor, can actually turn into adrenaline and noradrenaline, which are your real excitatory hormones that help to I suppose, it's your fight or flight kind of stuff, where it helps you, it gets you on that edge. Exercise, it's produced, good reasons for having it around, but you want a certain amount of it, and you want to be able to break it down at a point as well. And so if you've got too much of it, especially if you think about going into a confrontation, or you've been in a stressful meeting, or you've had a fight with a partner, anything like that, there's some individuals in that situation that have the stress response, and then they come right down and they're back to normal. Whereas there are other individuals who have that stress response, and literally for the rest of the day, they're kind of sitting up here. And we all know if you're that, if you're that person or not, or someone who is that kind of person. And for me, I can kind of get to that point, and then I come back down quite quickly. Whereas someone very close to me is completely the opposite. So it's being able to understand that, and then how to manage if you are that kind of individual, how to manage situations. So knowing that there's going to be a heightened stress response. So number one, going for, if you have especially gone in, if you've experienced a major trauma, major event like that, there's this increased risk for post-traumatic stress disorders. So going for counseling, really debriefing is a very, very important thing to do. And that's really just talking it through with someone who's listening and really like helping you process the information that's happened. And so where you'll see that is if you come out with the so taking a step back, if you break down these excitatory hormones really slowly, so that person who's kind of wired for a very long time, you will see an AA genotype here, and you will get the moderate impact in the middle around your mood regulation because it's around anxiety. On the other hand, you will see the COMT GG genotype. It's the fast-acting enzyme that helps to break down those excitatory hormones and neurotransmitters. And what we see then is that you will see a moderate impact on your neurodegenerative, so cognitive function, and addictive behavior, because now what we're seeing is it breaks down your dopamine really quickly and those other excitatory hormones, but especially looking at that breakdown of dopamine. And we know dopamine is especially beneficial for cognitive function. And so and obviously if we don't have enough dopamine, we're going to also crave more of it to get that rush. So fast enzyme, sort of the deactivators of dopamine, have an increased risk for cognitive decline and an increased risk for addictive behaviors. In those cases, it's around looking at how we can produce the dopamine as well as possible, and looking at I think a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy in those points, depending on what you're seeing for, if it's on the addictive behavior side. If it's on the cognitive side, if you've got a fast breakdown of dopamine, it's looking at what we call higher order activities. So being out, so anything that's going to help create or improve memory, improve cognitive functioning. So it's looking at learning a new hobby, taking up a new hobby, doing word puzzles, number puzzles, things like that. Moderate intensity exercise, and keeping social, especially in older years, ensuring that you are keeping social and you've got interaction with people, and that has been shown to negate the negative effects of the GG genotype with cognitive decline. So those are really, really important on the cognitive decline side. On the addictive side, we're looking at the omega-3 fatty acids, the vitamin D, building blocks, task completion, and cognitive behavioral therapy. We then look at the last one on your dopaminergic, your OPRM1. It's kind of in this middle space, but once you, it's a receptor for, it's an opioid receptor, and has been your GG genotype has been strongly associated with increased risk for opioid addiction, as well as an altered pain response. And so for those individuals, especially if you're thinking of, some of the major issues that have happened with prescription opioids becoming a big issue with regards to addictive behaviors, that's where there's quite a lot of research coming through on this one. And if you have the genotype risk there, it's giving insight on that side. And then also looking at if there is an increased pain response with that GG genotype, looking at alternative therapies to opioids. So this is more of an insight and a preventative one rather than what to do about it afterwards, but helping someone understand who they are, where they're at, their response to a lot of the opioid medications, and their increased sensitivity to pain. And looking at alternative methods, which you could get from looking at the DNA pain report, where it's explained more. Going into endocannabinoid system, where we're looking mainly here at increased risk for addictive behavior and addiction to cannabis. this is, again, not so much what to do about it if it's already happened, but preemptive. So some of these genes actually offering insight as an addictive risk score, and for an individual who maybe has a family history of addiction, or if there are kind of warning signs that you might feel, oh yeah, I might be kind of going towards that path. It's understanding, if I have these genotype risks, if this is a moderate or a high impact factor, I need to seek help as early as possible. I need to, it's really nice to know for your children, for your family members, it's a lot about preventing that from occurring, and in some cases it's managing it if it has occurred, understanding, okay, well, there is that specific risk to cannabis in this situation. So then if you look at your GABAergic pathway, which is really talking about GABA and this GABA receptor, if you're thinking about GABA, it's your calming neurotransmitter. You've got all of these excitatory ones, these stimulating ones that we've been speaking about, but GABA is really there to kind of bring you back down, calm you down, especially when, if you think about individuals who experience major social anxiety, or going into a situation where, I know for me it's heights, it's not a thing that I enjoy, and then my excitatory hormones, my adrenaline starts pumping madly, and I want my GABA there to kind of bring me back to earth. And so this is where this receptor is so important, in being able to get the GABA to attach to that receptor and then have that feeling of calm come over you again. So interestingly, this was actually first, the research is really good in terms of addictive behavior with regards to alcoholism. And the mechanism behind that is individuals who do not have a well-functioning receptor. Remember, there's kind of like a disconnect. That receptor is associated, or that genotype is associated with increased risk of social anxiety and not being able to cope well in those social situations. And so alcohol becomes a crutch. And so in those situations, that's actually where there's an increased risk for, and then you get the calming effect of alcohol, and then these individuals are then much at a higher risk of alcoholism. And so again, from that point of view, early recognition is the most important intervention. Understanding if someone, you can recognize uneasiness in social situations, or recognize someone who kind of shies away or goes completely over the top in social situations. That's almost a GABA disconnect. And that's where the risk for those kinds of addictions does become higher. Again, screening, prevention is better than trying to manage it in the long run. Other interesting facts around this GABA is that there is an increased risk, some evidence showing increased risk for benzodiazepine addiction, because it's it kind of acts as the fake GABA. It attaches to this receptor, so it gives you that feeling. And so that's also for individuals who suffer from anxiety, it's something that's often prescribed. But understanding, if you have this receptor, it's really important to see how else can you manage anxiety? What is the root cause of the anxiety? Address that first. So when you're looking at this receptor and you see that you have a high impact, look at how you can address the cause of the anxiety, avoid those anxious hormones from building up in the first place. Looking at deep breathing, which is absolutely amazing for helping to calm. So proper deep breathing techniques, cognitive behavioral therapy, and that being really important over here. And then your zinc, your magnesium, also just helping with the calming in this situation as well. So the evidence is really strong around the addictive behavior, but you can definitely pull it through to your mood dysregulation and your anxiety kind of feelings. Address the cause, and that really helps you to understand, especially if it's you who's suffering from this and you have that high impact you can then start to understand and have a little bit of forgiveness for yourself, and really address it from that, what is the cause, what is driving the anxiety, and now I know how to fix it by really just helping with certain foods, nutrients, anti-inflammatory diet, and deep breathing techniques to really assist with this GABA production. Lastly, from the GABA production side is good gut health and a good quality probiotic. There's almost a whole new area of research going into psychobiotics, they're now called, and that's really, really important, looking at that gut, brain-gut health connection, especially for anxiety, and good quality probiotics have been shown to increase the production of these receptors. So very interesting research going on there. This individual has come out with this BDNF, this TT genotype, this high impact, meaning BDNF is not producing as well as we would like. BDNF is what we call a neurotrophic factor. It's produced in the brain. It helps with memory formation, motivation. So motivation in terms of quite a lot around addictive behavior, memory formation, very important around cognitive decline, and then managing anxiety and stress. So starting off with the cognitive decline side, this is where, especially if you've got this comped together with it, you really want to focus on how can you improve the production of BDNF. Well, I mean, that's across the board. How do you do that? High intensity exercise, interval training, very, very good for producing BDNF in higher amounts, and some fantastic studies showing pre and post intensity exercise and showing a much higher production of this fantastic like memory cognitive forming gene, and better cognitive function post exercise. So why do you feel good after you've gone outside and jumped up and down a little bit after sitting for too long? You're actually producing BDNF. So the next time you go out on your bike, go for a run, go to the gym, you know what you're doing is you're producing BDNF, and then you'll be able to actually study better, work better, and remember things better. Any kind of exercise, if you're not at the point where you can do high intensity exercise for a numerous amount of reasons, any exercise is better than nothing. So don't think that if you can't do high intensity, then we should just leave it. Any exercise will help with the expression, but high intensity is the best. Also, getting outside into natural sunlight and a natural environment is really, really important. That is something, especially when we're talking about BDNF under an anxiety point of view. With high stress, there's a strong decrease in this gene, which then leads to increased inflammation, increased feelings of anxiety. And so good ways to manage this is actually through, again, exercise, but getting out into that natural environment, deep breathing has been shown to really be beneficial in this case around the anxiety side. And then on the addictive behavior side, BDNF has been very strongly linked to, with the TT genotype, so this high impact, very strongly linked to binge eating disorders. So in these cases, you may not be the candidate for intermittent fasting to an extreme level, because that next meal, unless you have extreme self-control, may be much bigger of the unhealthy quantity than you wanted to have. So individuals who do have this genotype and are inclined towards binge eating disorders or binge eating, intermittent fasting may not be, in this specific case, the ideal, and looking at a more moderate approach to dietary intake, just general healthy eating habits. Mediterranean style diet with your vitamin D helps to increase BDNF. Natural sunlight helps to increase BDNF, and exercise. So that's how you can really support this. It's kind of like this wonder gene when it comes to stress management, cognitive function, and just feeling well. Last but not least is your serotonergic system. It wouldn't be DNA Mind without mentioning serotonin. Remember, 98% of it is made in your gut. That doesn't get to the brain through the blood-brain barrier, but it connects via your vagal nerve. And so that's why gut health is so, so important. And so you want to make sure that when you're eating your building blocks for serotonin, your tryptophan especially, it's actually converting with your good gut health, good bacteria in your gut, helping to produce serotonin and having a healthy gut microbiome, so that your vagal nerve, that connection to your brain, is very sensitive, and so there's good communication to what's happening in the brain. So that's the first step. The next thing is, I've mentioned now, tryptophan. It's the building block. You want to ensure that you're getting in enough of that amino acid. And that's where some of the other functional tests that Nordic offers are so useful as well, to be able to understand your amino acid status. And then looking at what you're taking in through diet. So your tryptophan, your B vitamins, again, through your green leafy vegetables, being very, very important. Often taken with a carbohydrate-rich source. Tryptophan is better taken up to the blood-brain barrier. And so that's actually sometimes why in some circles 5-HTP is recommended, because it's very easy. It's gone past that level and crosses the blood-brain barrier very nicely. Okay, so that's where what you need to make to make serotonin, and then it needs to be transported and attached to the different receptors. And here we're looking at those where if you have high impact factors here, there's an increased risk for depression, feeling blue, and with anxiety disorders. And so interventions around exercise. So exercise helps to produce serotonin, gut health and those building blocks, getting in those dietary building blocks, and the Mediterranean style diet have been significantly associated with improved functioning of your serotonin pathways. And that when you have imbalances there, it's linked to kind of your addictive behaviors, especially around, again, alcoholism and depressive disorders. So manage your diet, manage your weight, manage your gut to get better brain health and just actually feeling good overall. So I hope that's given you great insight as part 2 of going through the DNA Mind report. There's a lot of information here, but really so valuable to address very key areas and target where you might have a weakness. And by doing so, you improve maybe not only the mood side, but also cognitive side and overall feeling of well-being. And that's really the goal, living long, but living really, really well holistically. So thanks so much for your time and good luck going forward.